you have questions about the future? Well, of course you do. We all do. And as a church leader, as a pastor or ministry leader, you know that to a certain degree, we have to be aware of what's happening. We have to be aware of what's coming, and we have to know how to navigate the coming future. As I talked about in our previous episode, horizon scanning and trend analysis and all that is wonderful. It's great information. It's good to understand. But what do we do with that? Once we get it, once we have our trend analysis, once we know where things are going and how they're going to kind of figure out, what do we then do with that? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about in this episode. I'm going to show you the next step in your experience, your process in learning what the future of the church looks like. This is the next step in the plan, and this is how you take all of that information you've been gathering and all those trends you've been looking at. This is how you take those and then start to create the future and understand what's coming down the pipe. So let's get started. So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. I hope you are doing wonderfully on this very beautiful fall day. Whatever it is, wherever you are going today, whether you're having meetings, whether you're sitting in the office, whether you're just taking some downtime, I hope it's well. I hope you're doing great. And I'm so thankful that you're here. I'm so thankful that you are a part of the Ministry Hacker community. You're joining us. And if this is your first time with us here on the podcast, I want to tell you what we do. Here at Ministry Hackers, what we do is we help pastors and ministry leaders just like you find the dream life that God has created for you. A life where you get to pastor a growing church, a growing ministry, where you get to pour out your heart to people, where you get to fulfill the calling that God's placed on your life. But at the same time, you get time with your family, time with your friends. You get free time to have a hobby, to travel, to do whatever it is that you enjoy doing. This fulfilling life of ministry. I think it's high time that you and I, as pastors and ministry leaders, we live fulfilling lives, serving God, serving people, and enjoying the life that God has granted us. And so that's what we do here at Mystery Hackers. We help you do that. And I want to invite you, if you've ever thought about creating your own podcast, or maybe you want to create a platform, or maybe you at your church, you've been wanting to create a podcast for your ministries, for your people to listen to tune in, and you're just not really sure where to get started. Well, what I want to do is I want to invite you to take advantage of this free course that I've just created. You go to brandonpartycooper.com/podcast course. And what you're going to find there is you're going to find this course. It's going to take you step by step all the way through to creating a podcast from nothing, from zero. If you're saying, I have no idea how to start a podcast, I don't even know where to begin, this course is for you. It's step by step, takes you one day at a time. Do this on this day, do this on that day. At the end of 2 weeks, you will have a podcast recorded, edited, and ready to go. And don't worry about the tech. I walk you through all of that. It's simple, it's cheap, it's easy. The podcast format is the easiest way to create a platform. It's the easiest way to get your church's message out there. Creating a podcast is the easiest way to do it. And this free podcast course is the fastest way to do it. And so I want to encourage you, go to brandonpartycooper.com/podcast course. Sign up there, get started. Again, it's free. So even if you sign up and you say, you know what, this course really isn't that great, I'm not getting a lot of value out of it, you haven't lost anything. But if you take that step, you try out the course, you get in there, go step by step, all the way through the process, in 2 weeks, you'll have a podcast up and running out there for the world to hear and to listen to get in. Your message will be out there. And so again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/podcast course and get your course, get started building your podcast today. Okay, so over the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about the future of the church. We've been talking about how you can know what the future of the church is. And we've kind of walked through a couple of steps so far of creating this idea or this perspective, this understanding of what the future looks like. And so the first really big step that we took in our last episode that we talked about the future of the church, the first really big step was horizon scanning, where we looked out over the horizon. We kind of took in what was down the road. We looked across the horizon. We said, okay, here are the things that are happening. Here are the trends that are happening. Here are the things that are currently developing, growing, whatever. And that's the first step in understanding what the future looks like. It's identifying trends and then analyzing them through horizon scanning, through looking across, saying this trend and this trend and this trend, these I think are going to matter. These are going to impact what we do at the church, what we do in ministry, what we do as pastors. We talked about how you then take those trends and you start to analyze them and figure out, okay, here's how they might play out. Well, you have this collection of trends, and quite honestly, if you've really gone through the process and you've done a good steeple analysis and you've kind of looked at all of these pieces, you have a lot of trends, and it's hard to know now what to do with them. Uh, you know, how do you take all of this information and create an understanding of the future? Well, what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you the tool that you're going to use to look at these trends, to process them through, and to create an understanding of what the future is going to look like. And the tool is called scenario planning. Now, scenario planning has been around for about 30 years or so. It originated in the Shell company, the gasoline company Shell. What they did is they used scenario planning to project out what's going to happen in the oil industry, what's going to happen in their corners of the world and their areas that they had businesses in, so that they could be better prepared for what the future was going to look like. And it's led to a great deal of the success that Shell has had over the last several decades. And since then, scenario planning has been used across the board throughout organizations and businesses all over the world. In the church world, we really don't use scenario planning. In fact, most of us aren't even familiar with what scenario planning is. And so what scenario planning really is, at its very core, is it's creating narratives about probable futures, not possible ones, because there are too many possible futures, but looking at probable futures, the futures that we can most likely count on. So therefore, we can most likely prepare for. It's taking all of this information and all this data and all these trends and analysis and all that. It takes all of that and it packages it into narrative formats, story formats, where we can say, okay, if this is the reality we're looking at, if this is the future we're going into, here's how we will handle that. Here's how we will prepare for it. Here's the decisions we will make today in order to be better prepared to navigate through that down the road. That's what scenario planning at its very core is. And it's a simple tool to use. And that's the one thing I like about a lot of the strategic foresight processes, is that most of them are very simple but powerful tools to use. And so scenario planning is one of them. And so usually what we do is we will take all of the trends and all of the uncertainties and all the things that we are looking at, and we'll choose 2 of them. And then we'll grid that onto 4 quadrants. So, we'll take on the x-axis and the y-axis, we'll put 2 different uncertainties and we'll pit them against each other, and we'll create 4 different boxes. And in each box, it represents a probable future. And usually we use 4 kind of categories for each box. And so if you imagine 4 boxes, 2 by 2 stacked on top of each other, if you're looking at it, the bottom left of your 4-box quadrant, your matrix, is going to be your total collapse. In our last session, we talked about where everything goes wrong. Total collapse, everything falls apart, nothing goes well. That's the bottom left quadrant. The top right quadrant is going to be everything goes right. That's going to be complete transformation, total new reality. Everything is going forward in a positive way, and here's what we can expect. The top left quadrant is going to be an enhanced or is going to be a business as usual. So everything is slightly better, but it's really kind of what we've seen in the past is going to continue on, and that's kind of what we're going to look at. And then the bottom right is going to be an enhanced continuation. So not only is everything going to continue in the trend that it currently is, but then we're going to see a greater increase. So we're not quite to a transformational stage, but things are getting better than what they have been, or even better than what we projected them to be if all things remain the same. And so So those are the 4 quadrants. And so what I thought it would be interesting to do is to just kind of walk through a scenario plan, looking at 2 uncertainties so you can kind of see it in action. And the 2 uncertainties that I chose are 2 that are constantly debated and been at the forefront of all of our minds over the last several years, last 2 or 3 years, and that's online church. And so the 2 uncertainties that I chose were online church and just church attendance, live church attendance, those 2. So online church, live church attendance. What future can we expect given these 2 uncertainties? If we were to put them on the grid, we would create the matrix 2 by 2. What can we expect? And so what we can expect at the very worst scenario, where everything collapses, is where online church tanks, everything falls apart, nobody comes to church. And at the same time, nobody walks in through our building. Nobody comes through the doors. Nobody comes to the sanctuary. We're looking at an empty room. If both online church and live church attendance both tank, then we see the collapse of church attendance overall, which essentially we see the collapse of church, and we see the collapse, at least of institutional church, gatherings in institutionalized buildings, where there's budgets and processes and all of those things. What we think of as church, that would be a complete collapse. And we've seen this in some areas of the world. We actually have seen this play out, maybe not necessarily with the online church element playing into, but we've seen where church attendance completely falls. Church buildings are abandoned. They're bought up and used for other things. They're used for coffee shops and bars and retail stores, whatever. But they're no longer churches. And the church body is either dispersed in very low numbers in small pockets around the cities, or they're completely non-existent at all. So that's one scenario, one possible future, is the complete collapse of church attendance. Now, if we go up to the top left and we go exclusively live attendance, so online church really kind of peters out and disappears, and everybody's coming to a physical building, which means that more people are coming into the building, more people are connecting with one another in a live sense. Churches are a lot more community oriented because you have to be physically there in order for them to be in attendance. And so there's not a lot of connection with people around the country. There's not a lot of people connection with people who are maybe shut-ins or maybe in a prison ministry. It's really just the people in your local community attending a local church building and being a part of that environment. So that's the exclusive live attendance, no online attendance. Everything is local. Everything is tight-knit, close to the community itself. In the bottom right is where we would have exclusively online church. So in this scenario, exclusive online church is where there is no live attendance. In fact, there may not even be a building anymore. We are just meeting solely online. And whether that's meeting, like we do now on YouTube and Facebook, or if it's all the way to the extreme of, using Web3 and starting to meet in virtual environments and virtual churches and virtual spaces where we have avatars and we're walking around and visiting, even though we're sitting in our at our desk or in our living room or whatever the case is. That's the exclusive online church model, where you could be going to church with people from all over the world and having no local community tie to them at all. You may only see them, you may only see them at church because they're not in your local community. So there's no way for you to just run into them at the grocery store. There's no way for your kids and their kids to really interact with each other. They're not on the baseball team, or, they're not going to the same school. None of those things are possible because it's all virtual. It's all online, and everything is through the internet. And then the final top right quadrant would be where online church and live church both are thriving, where you have a community of believers that's not only local, but it's global. You have connections with people all over the world, because not only are you attending church with the people that you rub elbows with at the grocery store and at the local school and at the local sports events, but you're also rubbing elbows with people from all over the world who are living in completely different cultures, completely different countries. Their lives look very different from you, yet you're coming together and you're connecting. And so that would be the fourth scenario. Now, what we would do is take these four scenarios and we would just kind of write out a narrative. I kind of did that a little bit, but we would add a little more depth to it, a little bit more feel, a little bit more emotion, a little bit draw the picture a little bit better. So if you had a team, anybody could read that narrative and get a good sense of what that scenario, what that future would look like. When they sat down and they read the future of exclusive live attendance, they could see that, they could feel it, they could understand, and they could then make decisions based on what that reality would look like. And so once you have these four scenarios, you have these four quadrants, these four narratives, you're now equipped to start then thinking about what the next step would be, which, we'll talk about that, but the next step in the process is starting to do the strategic planning. So if you were looking at a thriving online and a thriving live church scenario, this is the best case scenario where you have thriving on both and in a local community as well as a global community. How would you make decisions? How would you pastor? How would you lead your church forward if that were the case? Or if you were to go completely to an exclusive live attendance scenario, how would you lead through that? What would be the decisions you would make today to prepare for that? How would that change the way you currently lead? Or how would that change the way you currently approach ministry? Or maybe for you, that's probably more your world. And so if you were to go exclusive online, what would that look like? Would you be in ministry still if that were the case? Or would you step out? Or, would you navigate through some of the technical pieces and would you navigate through some of the mind shifts and perspective shifts that are necessary in order to pastor in that reality? And then you can start putting together plans. Now, the challenges and the temptation might be. The temptation might be to say, oh, but you know what? Exclusive online church is never going to happen. Like, that's just not, like, I get the draw of online church and I can see why some people would do it, but I just don't see that becoming a mainstream idea. And you may be right. But let's just say that 2020 played out a little differently than it did. Let's say that the quarantines and the shutdowns and all those things really didn't lift. Let's say we were looking at our current reality still being in that world where you weren't allowed to meet, you weren't allowed to, and put aside the debates on whether you believe COVID-19 is really dangerous or not. Let's put all of that aside. Let's just ask the question, what if something were to happen and we were to completely isolate and not be able to meet? That could very well be a scenario that would create the situation for an exclusive online church. Are you prepared for that? Are you willing to go that direction? Because the one thing that we really can't do is we can't just out of hand dismiss any of these possibilities. Because we know the reality is that online church currently is on the rise. There are growing numbers of people attending online church. We also know that there are declining numbers of people in live church. And those can both ebb and flow. And obviously, I think my personal belief is that both of them will continue to grow. But we just don't know what possibilities there are, which is why we have four different scenarios that we're looking at. Is it possible there will be a complete collapse of church attendance? It's possible. Is it likely? Maybe not. Is it probable? With given circumstances and certain situations, sure, it's probable. If you look at the declining number of discipleship happening in churches, so then there's this growing disconnect with the Bible, with Scripture. Then we have this growing disdain for Christianity and Christians among within society. We have all of these different trends that are actually leading more towards a decline in church attendance, not at the rate that we've seen it, but in growing rates if certain things were to take place. And so is that a possibility? Sure. Collapse of church attendance really is a possibility, where we're living in we're living in an underground church scenario where we're meeting in small pockets, in homes, and small group ministry now becomes the only real ministry there is that's viable. And we see this in other parts of the world where we have underground churches, and that's how they meet. They don't meet in buildings. They don't meet in organizational, institutionalized churches. They're a handful of people that are meeting in secret in an underground church scenario. And they have one Bible amongst them all. They share it, they study it, and it's just them, and they don't talk about it outside of that room. So these are possibilities. And if you are a pastor and ministry leader and you're saying, well, I think things are just going to continue on as they are, we're going to ebb and flow, and we're just going to kind of figure it out as we go. That's a fine way to approach it. But I think what 2020 showed us is that we have to be ready for the possible shifts that we can't predict, the things that we're not sure of. And sure, trend analysis will give us an idea of what that looks like. And trend analysis will help us to kind of see things developing. But there are curveballs that God that are thrown our way that God challenges us to navigate through. Do I think that God created COVID-19 and the pandemic and shutdown? I don't think he created it. But I also don't think it caught God off guard. The problem is it caught a lot of us off guard. And rather than being prepared to navigate through a challenge like that, a lot of us really struggled. We really scrambled to figure out what to do and how to keep things alive and going. And if you're listening to this, you're watching this, there's a good chance that you navigated through it. You came out on the other side, you were fine. But the reality is that many pastors, many churches, many ministry leaders did not. And they closed their doors for good. And they're no longer serving their communities wherever they are because they couldn't navigate through COVID-19, 2020, and the pandemic shutdowns. What scenario planning will do is it'll equip you with the ability to look ahead and prepare. Maybe not necessarily go headlong into any of the futures, but to be prepared in case those futures come to you. And in the next step, what we're going to talk about our preferred future, the one that we really want, and how to strategic plan towards that. But for now, in this episode, what I really want to encourage you to do is start thinking about taking those trends, taking that analysis that you looked at, and start creating a scenario plan. 4 quadrants, 2 uncertainties, and start asking the question, what do those scenarios look like? And how do I better prepare my team, better prepare my congregation? How do we equip ourselves to navigate through the possible challenges that are coming down the way so that we can continue to serve people, so we can continue to bring the gospel of Jesus to life in people's lives, regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in? That's the beauty of scenario planning, and that's my encouragement to you, is to be prepared to continue on mission regardless of what comes our way. Alrighty, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope this is helpful. I'm enjoying this process as we're looking at strategic foresight. I hope it's something that's helpful for you and maybe new to you, but it's definitely something that is easy to do. It's easy to figure out. It's easy to walk through if you just take the time to walk through the steps and do the work that's necessary. All right, have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode.